too much of the TA ask has been based around holding up a defensive shield, right? Let me try and protect my budget. Let me try and protect my fiefdom, and not around creating this almost like this windshield to the future. So yes, you can see what's happening in the rearview mirror, and history does dictate some of future activity and outcomes. But actually, start looking forward at the opportunity and down the road, and seeing how you can align that opportunity to create opportunity for your organization.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I'm Johnny Campbell, CEO and co-founder of Social Talent. And this week on the podcast, we're speaking with Blair about TA pronouns. This is going to be an interesting one. I think we're going to enjoy this one. Kev, you're very welcome to the podcast. Back again, previous podcast guest, even before the official podcast that we launched 4 years ago. You were on one of our earlier incarnations of a video podcast, and always wonderful to have you on the show. Wonder, for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of hearing you speak or meet with you in person, Kev, if you could tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, happy to, and thanks for having me, Johnny. So currently I'm the global head of talent acquisition at Ericsson. I've been there for 12 months, loving life, doing the work, the transformation work we have going on there. And in my spare time, I'm the co-founder of the Exec TA Social, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And my background, career TA leader, something I've always loved. I love what we do. I love that we have a product. I love that we create real value for an organization. So former global head of TA at IBM, former global TA leader at Cisco. Always worked in technology, and as I said, always worked in talent acquisition, both from way back in my search days. I've been in-house for about 25 years, which kind of, I guess, ages me a little bit.
Well, Kev, I've always appreciated your insights, and I'm somebody who, first thing I usually do is when I'm talking to a leader about their challenges, I go, "Do you know Kev? You need to meet him." And you've always been very generous with your time and spoke with many
I had
different.
one of them this morning on LinkedIn, actually. Yeah,
Did
I
you?
won't name check him, but that was this morning as well. Yeah,
I love that, and you're always very generous with your time, one on one, and now you're doing it one to many in terms of sharing your insights, and you have always been very insightful. I was at one of your talks in Dublin. Great to see you back in Dublin last month, Kev.
you
And you
too.
were talking. You opened the talk with, and I smiled at this. You said, "So, TA, what are your pronouns?" I wanted to explore that because people might go, "Where are we going to go with this?" But Kev, I might ask you to explain. After you got a chuckle from that, where did that go? And when you give that intro about how does TA identify itself, what exactly are you talking about?
Yeah, no, and listen, as you know me well, and a lot of people know me, it was always designed to get the chuckle, but also be a little bit provocative in the thinking as well, to make us think about what we are and what do we identify as. Because I think as we start to think about the evolution of TA, and we've been talking about it for such a long time, and but broadly, it's yet to find its true voice in terms of its point of impact in an organization. Is it a service provider? Is it a consulting organization? Is it a reseller? Is it a wholesaler? Is it B2B or is it B2C? Our products are consumers, they're people, they're individuals, they're humans. Are we a franchise? Are we a break off from HR, where we take some of the work and practices and methodology and we deliver it back? Are we a not-for-profit? Are we doing this in service of people's careers and just elevating organizations and giving people opportunity? And I think that's the real thing, is this, what is TA identifying as? Because once you know what you identify as, you're able to articulate your value. And being able to demonstrate that value is something I believe that is a big gap across many, many areas of talent acquisition. And I think I see that play out when you see organizations hitting the TA organizations very hard, not valuing them, not partnering with the right organizations with the right performance metrics, because they're not understanding the value of the organization fully.
Kevin, you're in many of the same rooms that I'm in terms of whether it be online or in-person rooms with other leaders. And we're in a challenging environment as we close out 2024, where a lot of TA leaders' budgets were cut. A lot of decisions that TA leaders thought were theirs and previously were theirs got pushed back to CFOs making decisions for them. And so you have, I think, after a couple of years where VPs of TA were gods because hiring was the hardest thing in the world. It was the most important thing for companies. And all of a sudden, it changed a bit in the last 2 years, particularly in tech. I think you have that identity crisis with a lot of TA leaders who aren't sure what's going on. They're looking at AI as well, going, is AI going to change my whole team and structure? I've been in conversations where people are terrified about losing headcount because what they see is they see themselves as the protectors of headcounts. I need a big team and keep a big team as well. So there's a lot going on, right, as we close out 24 that might be causing these TA leaders panic. But what would you say is the most typical, or are the most typical um, ways that TA leaders see the role and see the function? You listed a bunch of different ways, but if I could narrow down to one or two, what do you think are the most common that you see out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. It's a big question, so I think there's a couple of things within that. I think first of all, I think what we're seeing is I think everybody talks with great affection for the booms of 21, 22, the kind of during and post COVID, early post COVID era has been very good. What wasn't very good is it created this almost hyperinflation of experience on TA elevation. So what happened is a lot of people accelerated up because companies became, very much in need of accelerating talent through the TA functions, and that therefore were making what was, I think, wild decisions when I look at some of the roles where people were being put into, either not having a full understanding and appreciation, so coming from loosely attached areas of the sector, or just not having gone through the learning experiences of the different elements of TA, and therefore, when the market squeezed, it was very difficult for a lot of people to be able to articulate what they were creating value for the company. And I think that ties to this obsession in talent acquisition, and many TA leaders have, with these self-congratulatory metrics, right? And we've talked about this before. We've talked about this in public, and we've also talked about it over at Guinness as well. And we know that, I have very strong feelings on these, is that, we've got to move away from this homogenized approach to how we measure our success. And got to stop convincing organizations to give us our own predefined self-congratulatory metrics that show us that look good. So it shows that we can hire this profile, which is easy, and we benchmark that against hiring this profile that's more difficult. And what we do is we amortize our data, that gives us an average. One of these creates significantly more value for the company, that has more value creation for the organization, that has commercially more value to the organization. The other one may not. Doesn't mean it's not important. Okay, every role has a value in a company, but we've got to stop this narrative that we homogenize our data and we talk about things that aren't that important anymore. And we throw them together, and what we do is, and listen, I went on this path as well. Like I remember the moment when I realized that I was in a leadership meeting 7 or 8 years ago, and I remember presenting back the company key performance indicators for recruitment that I'd inherited. And I got up and they'd all been red. Like when I got there, they'd all been red. And then I'm presenting, and like now, 6 months in, half of them are green. And I remember like the HRLT, like the group I was presenting to, it kind of almost like spontaneously clapped. They were like, "This is great. This is," and I'm like, "Well, hang on. All I've done is remove a process step in India, which at the time was about 30% of our hiring, and that had skewed so many metrics the other way. I hadn't really got under the skin of improving the quality of the team. I hadn't really got under the skin of the hiring manager capability, hiring manager enablement. Hadn't really got under the skin of those things. And that's when I was like, we've got to start presenting this data, because it just doesn't work in service of articulating the value of what we do, which is ultimately tying us back to revenue, revenue or product, at the very least product, or whatever your company produces. But ultimately, the purpose of business is to drive shareholder values. What is recruitment doing to drive shareholder value? How do you articulate it? Are the shareholders asking what our time to fill is? I don't think a shareholder's ever asked me that.
It's funny. I was in a session with 50 TA leaders last month, and we talked about, I was out on TA dashboards, and we had several people get up and show their dashboards, and it was the same old shit. It was, my
My
time to
dashboard's
fill,
bigger
my
than yours. Was that it? My
oh,
dashboard's bigger than yours. Yeah, yeah.
was just seriously, it was down to who are the most, like, the photographs were being taken of the most complicated dashboards. And I'm looking at them going, as a business owner, right? I'm kind of going like, I know, like, like as a business owner, and I don't work full time recruiting anymore. I couldn't care less about that data. I get those upstream metrics that a team has to measure because those upstream metrics may correlate with a downstream outcome. Totally get that. But I had this. I did a talk yesterday actually, Kev, with for a bunch of sales leaders, revenue leaders. We've always talked in this industry about how sales and marketing are closely aligned with recruiting. And the managing director of HubSpot, EMEA, who's the VP of sales there, got stood up, and he was talking about how they'd had it all wrong in HubSpot. He said this was they kind of have a realization around metrics, right? Because metrics are not unique to TA, Kev. Surprise. And you've supported these sales teams. He said we became obsessed with like how many calls people are making, the activities of sales. He said, and most sales leaders talk about the activities of sales. And he said, like, it doesn't matter. What do salespeople care about? They care about revenue and profit, like same basic business principles. And
Yeah.
and, and he said, they changed their whole approach to everything starts with that. How are we driving revenue and profit? And are we doing that? And you only get back to those activities if we're not work if we aren't hitting our numbers. You can work your way back upstream to a metric like that might indicate where the problem lies. So it's not
Yeah.
that the dashboard is completely irrelevant, because upstream you do have to try and figure out how to drive the outcome. But like, when you have conversations, or you have had conversations with business leaders, I'm guessing it's not about time to hire and everything else. So what is it about? Like, can you walk me through maybe some examples of proper business conversations that you've had with your leadership peers that you think other TA leaders should be having, or you hope they're having as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And first of all, the conversation you had with the revenue leaders, I want to come back to that in a second as well. We'll come back to that because I think that they do something different in their space through technology that we haven't done in our space yet. They're going on that journey, so we'll come back to that. But I think just in terms of the conversations you'd be having, it's again, it's back to our values. I'll give you an example. There's an example I shared at this event that we were at in Dublin. I've really spoken about it much publicly, but I was the former head of recruitment for a large organization where about 50% of our hiring was billable consultants, right? So they directly day rate consultants that were billable based on utilization, right? And at the time of going into the organization, parts of recruitment were a little bit federated, and I was given the task of consuming it into one organization with the team, and then going and finding those outlying teams that were disconnected. And one of those teams was North American consulting recruiting, right? And we went in to have a conversation with the leadership, and we talked about like how do we create this value. And they could clearly see that we were set up strategically and tactically to support them. Our operating rigor was a lot stronger, and it made sense to bring that across. But what they did is when they sent across the money for 86 people, and the capacity needed was for 100. And I went back to the finance organization, said, "No, you need to send the money for the 100." Blah, blah, blah. They said, "No, no, no. Those are open headcount, or they're not filled, or the maternity cover, or long-term sick, or whatever. So this is the cost of this is the price of the 86 of it. We're sending over." And I said, "Okay, well, let's have a look at the impact of those 14 other people." So what we did is we basically applied our performance metrics for our consulting hiring globally. We applied that to the capacity of 14 recruiters. We then overlaid that against the 3,000 to 3,500 hires that the consulting organization did in North America. And what we were able to do is have a determinate value that basically said, with an extra 14 recruiters on average, for supporting this organization, on average, we can speed up and expedite recruitment, with all of these extra qualitative metrics and our execution being better, to the tune of about, I think it was about 8 or 9 days, right? It was basically faster, right? And then, we basically said, this is the difference. This is the delta you've created for me. And then we handed our data over to their CFO, and we basically said, why don't you do the math based on what you know to be the case for your billable organization? And then I remember I was actually in New York at the time, and I remember it was like 10 a.m. we sent that stuff over. I remember getting a Slack call from the CFO 2 hours later. Can you chat? Yeah, sure. He said, right, we've run your numbers, and what we can say is that we can attribute an extra $94 million of revenue if you're able to impact that volume of hiring by 8 or 9 days, right? It's okay. So he said, so we're going to send over we're going to send over whatever, the 4 million for the extra 14 resources. Is that enough? What could you do with 6? And then I have to get into the conversation about, to manage a recruitment process effectively, you can't go too quick and you can't go too slow, right? Because everyone's got to make the emotional connections. Everyone's got to do their due diligence, operate in rigor. So, it's that kind of thing is, kind of, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right? So you do it well, you do it deliberate, and it's fast enough, right? And yeah. So again, in that example, what you're talking about there is a straight line between the work of our organization, our team, and a direct contribution to revenue with no real, impact other than the fact that it says, give me your investment and I'll give you a 20-to-1 return on your investment. It's a no-brainer. It's an easy conversation. And then more and more as we've got into those conversations, and I've worked, we've been in some sessions with you before, Johnny, where we've talked about, the 9 block where we plot roles on these 2 axes, one of business value and one of hiring complexity. And, looking at like what creates money for the organization, what produces product, what's the contribution of that role in an organization, and how do we start to calibrate our activities to that? Do we need to have a homogenized process? Do we need to have homogenized performance metrics? We should be breaking out our performance based on its value to the organization, not on whether it's quick and cheap or whatever. I don't know, whatever you measure it in, whatever, speed, cost, quantity, whatever, whoever's measuring what, there has to be clear value. And I think recruitment teams, in my experience, generally not only perform better like that, but generally operate in a better cultural ecosystem, because what they're doing is they know their value and they're able to align to work that better suits their skills, because not every recruiter is the same. So you have recruiters that absolutely want to work on the high hiring complexity, high demand, high business value, commercial discussions with the business and driving it forward. You also have ones that want to do the low complexity hiring that's important for the organization, but actually can be quite programmatic and deliberate. And again, what we often think about is that thing around the teams. And we just, we basically, divide the work up based on what the demands of the work are, not what the skills of our teams are, and not what the value we're trying to create is. And that, I think we took that for you, that old adage around, you have 100 roles and 10 recruiters. What do all the recruitment leaders do? Well, they give everyone 10 roles each. You don't do that. You give one recruiter 30, you give 2 recruiters 30, and then you put the remaining 8 recruiters on the 40 most important roles in that, because that's what drives value for the organization. And that's what's important. So
Two points I want to take from that. One, Kev, just in case our listeners missed it, you very deliberately didn't cook your own numbers. You asked the finance organization in that example to come back and do the math. I think that's really interesting point that's worth teasing out. Why did you do that, and why is that important? That to not do your own numbers.
So I'm going to answer it in an honest way and not in a post-rationalizing way, right? So if I was to post-rationalize, I'd say, because obviously it had more integrity, it put the pressure back onto them, and then I'd admit it. That was the learning from it. And that's why I've gone on to do it since. And I've actually asked finance teams to, and we're going through some processes here where we're actually asking business to deliver their numbers back to us and deliver their narrative back to us on it. But in reality at the time is I also didn't know what their charge out rate was and how they measured value, right? So for me, it could have been like, okay, they could have looked at these roles and thought, actually, 50% of these are back office. We don't attribute any value to that in terms of revenue value, or we attribute minimal, like $4,000 annually or whatever is the uplift on the shareholder value. But actually, they then looked at these roles, these gaps, and were able to specifically say, okay, the mix of these is X. So regular, senior, principal, managing partner, whatever. This is the average bill rate at those levels, and they were able to produce it. And you're right, the numbers had absolute credibility. Now, the learning from that is that then becomes a little bit habitual in how you work with the organization, because now I'm very comfortable with the idea of saying, like, this is what we do, this is what we produce, these are our performance metrics, or this is what we hope to achieve, depending on where you are in your maturity evolution. And like, what does the impact of this work mean? And how does that pull through? And I think they value that, because a lot of the conversations they have with many parts of HR, not all, but in many parts of HR conversations, are not talking about commercial value. They're talking about initiatives, incentives, programs that have a value that might be not even have an explicit value that you can point a finger to around employee engagement or diversity or payroll or target salary range strategy and stuff like that. And the leader's not always clear on what the value is. I know diverse teams are good. I know there's data that tells me that they perform better. And I know that organizational health is very important. But I'm being told to do this. Where's the very commercial value that attaches that? Whereas TA can have those conversations because we back to what do we identify as? We produce a product and we produce a product of a determinate value. And so how do we just articulate the value of that? And that's where we need to start moving. And less of this, being very comfortable with our homogenized, limited accountability framework.
When you talk about business value, I see a lot of leaders in this space striving to be that and believing they're talking like that, and how it plays out because they're like, I build business cases. I do this all the time. I show the value, and I was at a session recently where we had this conversation, and the facilitator was asking folks about value of different things, and several people were doing this. And we brought this new initiative in. We managed to save 286 man hours. They go, brilliant. How much? So that's 286 man hours off your budget, is it? They're like, no, there's savings and productivity worth 286 hours. He goes, yeah, but like, so much is off your cost line. And then the people are like, what do you mean that? Like, no, we're just more productive by this amount of hours. Like, well, that's not a real fucking saving. Pardon my language. That's a it's a nice notional thing, but finance, the business is going, but hours equals money, yes, and we can reduce money. And we had a conversation with Olga from Just Eat Takeaway recently on the show, and she was talking about an initiative she brought in around bringing an AI tool in for where those volume roles in terms of improving productivity, and she had X amount of hours saved. And I asked her, I said, "Oh well, is it hours saved or is it money?" She's like, "I took two headcount out." And that's somebody who really talks the business. Like, I didn't just make it a bit fancy, but actually, my cost is still the same. My headcount's still the same. I'm more productive, but then it's intangible. It's
Yeah.
tangible, measurable things. I think that's what we lack. I saw a great presentation in September from a leader who had brought in a really automated end-to-end AI solution for hiring volume, blue collar roles in a retail environment, and they took 400 recruiters out. Like,
Mhm.
that's a tangible, and it's a leader who's like, "I'm doing my job and creating value," versus, I see, and I know if you see I see leaders who just are terrified of losing headcount, terrified of a shrinking budget because they're not thinking about the business value. They're thinking about protecting their fiefdom, their budget, their people. So where do you land in terms of like what's the
I mean,
mindset?
yeah, yeah. I mean, so we're going through quite a large scale transformation here, and it's funny because when I started the business case and when I did it, I didn't approach it like a recruitment business case. I approached it like it was a commercial document that could have led to many different outcomes and scenarios without a predetermined case of give me more headcount, give me more budget, let me upgrade my technology or anything like that. And actually, some of the areas we focused on are things that often I've never seen when I've helped friends out or I've seen, or even when I've been privy to different tier pitches. They don't talk about things that you would talk about in commercial presentations. Mine had a lot around cost avoidance as much as it did around cost impact and direct spend, right? So this is the downstream impact to the organization of this decision, right? We avoid this future state. And the downstream uplift of productivity. So, working on if we do X, Y, and Z, what happens in the organization that necessitates that? Because for too long, I think you're right, is that, you know, too much too much of the TA ask has been based around holding up a defensive shield, right? Let me try and protect my budget, let me try and protect my fiefdom, and not around creating this almost like this windshield to the future. So yes, you can see what's happening in the rearview mirror, and history does dictate some of future activity and outcomes. But actually, start looking forward at the opportunity and down the road and seeing how you can align that opportunity to create opportunity for your organization, whether it be through automation, whether it be through AI. Every company takes different views on that. So there's no like, kind of like specific flavor you could do, but you've got to start looking at your organizational requirements and what you need to be of impact and how do you align to that. Now, these people who say, I took out, 400 headcount and two people, like that's great. It's a great story. But actually, is that like a net saving for the business, or is that actually we found a better way to produce and that we've made other investments or we've invested 30% of that? So we started to talk in terms of the net, the cost avoidance, the impact of the work is really important. And both those examples are really good cases where TA leaders have stepped forward and said, actually, let me start aligning to what the company needs and let me see where the cards fall and what that means for my team. And let me take brave commercial decisions that actually produce a better outcome and mean that I'm not tied to this binary position. And that actually, in some ways, segues back to the comments I made before about your revenue leaders, right? When you said I was with a bunch of CROs. One of the things that I've seen in CRM, significant steps that I haven't seen in recruitment technology, and I've been banging this drum for a couple of years, and I say it every time I meet a technology vendor, an ATS, a CRM, anyone, anyone claiming to have the next greatest thing that's going to impact my recruitability of the work, they don't have it. And that's the ability to direct the activity in the way I need it. They focus on MI, reporting, experience, UX, enablement, all very valuable things. But what you've seen with CRMs is they've started to direct the work of the salesperson, showing them where the best opportunity is to be successful, right? At the moment, no matter what, recruitment technology primarily is there to support the decision-making of the person, and the person is self-directing on that decision, right? So if I come in as a recruiter on a Monday and I say, you know what, tough weekend. What am I going to do today? Oh, I've got 10 recs open that have been open for a while. I'm just going to disposition 500 candidates off those requisitions. And they legitimize that work by saying, well, I've created value today because that's an activity and a task that needed doing. Ignore whether it could have been done through automation, which obviously should do and could do in the future. But what they've done is they self-direct that activity. Where's the glide path that shows where these people should be relative to the work that's expected of them, right? And I always talk about it as glide paths. Is like, I talked about this a couple of years ago. I would completely reverse the idea of time to fill. I would say if someone said to me, the average time to fill target for this, if that's what you want to have, should be 65 days. Don't start the clock at 0. Start the clock at 65 and start counting down. And then show everybody where they are relative to where they be. So in 2 weeks, you should be at first interview. 3 weeks, you should be at second interview. 4 weeks, you should be final round. And actually start to, and if you're not, based on that business value again, if you're like, that's easy for the easy roles and you're showing the hard, freeze them out of that work. Force
Mm,
them to work on the things that are really important
mm,
to your outcomes. But the homogenized metrics cover it. The 8 out of 10 roles that are potentially the 80% that are least important, they keep within that glide path because nothing's managing it. And the 2 that are way out, that are really real value, don't get serviced at all. But it doesn't matter because they get 80% within 65 days and
good.
everyone sits around and claps and says what a great result that was. And I think that's a big thing around this whole space around, if we're going to create value, we need to put more pressure on the technologists and the people who are bringing products in this market. Say, yeah, this is what we need. Yeah, there's this never-ending appetite for consumption of MI. I get it, but I've got pretty good MI. You link your ATS, your CRM up to Power BI, you get pretty good MI. I have enough MI to do what I need to do, right? So I don't need this incessant appetite to keep going forward. That reporting is the most important thing in an ATS. The ability as a leader to direct activity that serves the best outcome in the commercial interest of the business is what that technology needs to do. And that's what Salesforce Einstein does. It says, you know what, go and call this prospect because this is the point at which it's got the highest propensity to close. The AI enterprise AI architect, whatever, is this thing that Salesforce has just released as well. Using technology to direct in complementary way the person that's doing the activity to get to the best possible outcome. We're still allowing all this self-directed behaviors, and it's not that I want to create a kind of slave or servant mentality around. Well, just come in and do everything I tell you to do. But like people want to be successful, Johnny. People want to be told that they've had the most impact in the best possible way, and let us allow the processes and the technology to help them get there.
I love you mentioned that. We use Gong here in social talent as one of our sales tools and on top of a Salesforce stack and other things. And Gong does the analysis of your pipeline and your opportunities, and it looks at all these different activities, and it does exactly that. It tells you what you should be doing next, what the risks are, what you missed. So it
Yeah.
really does guide you rather than just saying, it just a document, a record keeper, because a lot of CRMs are just record keepers, right? And
Yeah.
ATS is are the same. This is actually going, here's the tactical things you should do on these particular, even these opportunities are the high value ones, the ones that are most likely to close. But here's the 4 things to do today, or the 5 things, or here's the risks
Well,
to that. But you're right,
yeah.
that doesn't exist. We seem to always lag behind.
Yeah.
HR tools lag behind the likes of the revenue tools, the sales marketing tools. Actually, and listen, before we digress off into that, if you're a leader listening to this, Kev, and you're kind of nodding your head going, "Oh, okay, that's right. I need to be doing more of that. I'm not doing enough of that. I am speaking the wrong metrics. I'm looking at the wrong things. I'd love to be able to talk to the business the way you talk to the business. I'd love to be able to have that conversation in terms of trying to do the things I need to get done." Where do you start? Like, what are the basics in terms of, hey, you'll need to have this in place before you start moving to this level, to this level? Or where does a leader go from here, listening to you going, I'm sold. Tell me what to do, Kev.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's no first of all, I wouldn't be arrogant enough to say there's a prescribed way that I know to do it, but because there's so much context that I miss it. But I think there's some ways in terms of the thought process and the activities that you can do to support it. The first one is, back to what you said at the very top of the conversation is what do we identify as? What we should be identifying as is a value creating services organization, right? And most services organization work on a bunch of core activities that lead to a collection of different performance metrics based around different categories. The one that I never see being used within talent acquisition, very rarely, some do, we do it and we're starting to do it, is focusing on wastage and latency, right? So instead of focusing on the outcome and the work that you do, any services organization would focus on wastage and latency, right? So where are we losing opportunity in the way we work? Where are we creating a burn in our budget cycles, or a burn in our time, and our burn in our activities? So I think starting to look at wastage and latency from a performance perspective is really important, and folding that in. I also think starting to move towards actually starting to drive towards actual dual accountability, and starting to project service expectations onto the organization that consume your work. You can create the highest performing, most value creating organization, but if you're not able to articulate the impact of not doing that work in the organization, I think that's huge. In the same way, if we go back to that consulting example, I could say to consulting leaders from that point on, every day you delay in this hire is costing this company $10,000. Every time this is happening, this is what's happening. Every decision, every time we have a candidate that doesn't turn up on day one, that's, I'm resetting that cycle. That's going to cost this organization $120,000, $150,000, $200,000 in lost billable revenue opportunity. So we're actually starting to project that dual accountability in commercial terms. I think is really, really important. Understand this is the impact of not doing it, and this is the impact of doing nothing. I think that's really important. And then I think starting to, again, back to the services mentality, it starts to segment and federate your work and how you service things. It was when I was in this services, this consulting organization, one of the business leaders actually played it back to me in the story. One of our clients, one of our IT services clients, was a major bank, and they said, what we have is we support them across everything in IT. And what we have is we have our offshore, our nearshore, and our on-site. He said, our on-site people, site reliability engineers, this bank has told us every minute that their trading platform is down, cost them about $2 million a minute, right, in lost margin and revenue. And so he's like, so when somebody's laptop doesn't turn on, we don't send the guy in the office, who's the site reliability engineer, up to that floor to fix it. We send them off to the offshore site where someone can help them with that, because that's the service they require. These people need to make sure nothing's falling over. So starting to actually, and that's what the business played back to me when I was talking about the differentiating recruitment services. They were like, yeah, don't send your very senior recruiter that can absolutely smash in a managing partner hiring in Western Europe. Don't send them over to go and hire our janitorial staff,
Mm,
because we're killing the value of the service,
mm.
right? And so I think that starting to get into segmenting the service is really important as well.
Kev, at this point, as we close, I usually ask guests how can people follow up with you? But I want to bring up your background, Exec TA Social, as
The
rather than just message me on LinkedIn. Tell me about Exec TA Social, and tell our audience about how anyone listening who does want to find out more might be able to leverage Exec TA Social for help.
Yeah. So yeah, no, absolutely. So Exec TA Social is a community of TA leaders, TA executives only. So we tend to stick to the people at the very top. And what we set it up about 8 to 9 months ago, myself and Dion, and both heads of TA, both in-house heads of TA, bit disillusioned with a lot of the space where we got information from. What we've always found it is to be, really, a very vendor-led construct. And we wanted to build a safe environment. So we kind of set it up, and we've worked very closely. You've done a lot with our community, Johnny, in private, where we basically said, let's create this safe space. We have about 800 heads of TA in 10 countries around the world. We're continuing to grow that. And if anyone wants to reach out and get involved and join our community, it exclusively inclusive, I think is how we describe it. Is it's for heads of TA. It's for people that are these conversations we've had today. It's for those conversations to happen in a safe environment on a one-to-one or a one-to-many basis. And what we do is we invite the vendor in to have that to bring their expertise in. And you've done some things with us as well, where we say, we had a great example is the license to hire we did recently. 4 or 5 communities asked, well, how do we do hiring manager enablement? I was like, phone Johnny. He said, listen, can you come into do a chat with our organization, not based on what social talent's doing, but based on your experience and everything you have to offer. Came in, a great chat, everyone got the knowledge in a safe environment to ask you the question, and then you bug out, and it's been great so far. Really, really enjoyable. Puts a lot of pressure on the time, but it's going fantastic. So
And the cost to a senior TA executive to join Exec TA
there's no
Social?
cost. Yeah, there's no cost. It's a free community that we run through the platform and through WhatsApp communities, and it's completely free. Like I say, it's just we keep it exclusively to heads of TA or senior TA executives, people who sit on the executive team in TA. And as I said, it's a global community, so it's going.
Is there webs?
Yeah, it's a
Is
great
there webs?
environment.
Their website, a social handle, a TikTok channel we can go find Exec TA Social at?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd start with Exec TA Social on LinkedIn. It's very timely because if you look at a post by Exec TA Social yesterday, they announced the website's getting launched next week. So
Promise.
execTA.social will be live from next week. So definitely check it out.
Probably by the time this is live and broadcast as well, Kev. So fingers crossed.
Even better. Yeah, so will be absolutely. So
Well, Gav, really want to thank you for coming on, sharing your wisdom, advice, tons of insights there for anyone listening in. As always, it's a pleasure, Kev. We can have you back every week, and we would run out of
no,
ideas. So really
thank. At least I
appreciate you.
hope I hope I hope I don't sound too ranty. I'm so passionate about some of these topics, and I just that's why you joke about sending people my way. Like I always make time to have these conversations. If anyone wants to reach out to me one-to-one, like I'm so passionate about helping us as a sector move this stuff along. So always my pleasure.
Pleasure. And thank you for listening, audience, as well. We're taking the time out to enjoy this conversation. We'll be back next week with another episode. And if you have any suggestions for guests, please reach out to me, johnny@socialtalent.com, and we'd love to hear your ideas. Until next week, thanks and take care.